Today we're going to talk about gunshot residue. Gunshot residue is abbreviated GSR. So we're going to take a look at what happens when a bullet is fired in terms of gunshot residue. So here's kind of the basic process. When a firearm is discharged, okay, so when you pull the trigger and the bullet flies down the barrel of the gun, some of the unburned or partially burned up particles of the gunpowder are propelled out of the barrel. So all that gunpowder that's in the cartridge, some of it kind of gets blown out behind the bullet when the weapon is fired. So if the weapon is very close to a target, those powder residues are going to end up on the surface of that target, and that's what gunshot residue is. When we take a look at the distribution of those particles, it allows us to tell the distance from which the weapon was shot. So the more particles there are, the closer the person was. The less particles or no particles means the person was further away. So in this picture here, you can kind of see right here, here's your bullet over here, and then all these particles, and they're not necessarily horribly visible to the naked eye, but they're there, and they're kind of flying out of the barrel of the gun after discharge. So, determining distance using gunshot residue. Gunshot residue spreads out more as the distance between the muzzle and the target increases. So the closer you are to your target, the closer the GSR is going to be, and it's going to spread out more and more the further you get away from your target. So the first thing we're going to look at is a contact discharge. That's where your gun would be right on top of your surface. So you're like either touching it or just like millimeters away from it. There's no time for the powder to spread out, so it's almost going to be the perfect shape of the gun. So like if you look right here, this is a .22 caliber weapon right here. Okay, right here, and you can see that the discharge, it's almost in a perfect circle of what the barrel of the gun would look like, because there's no time for it to spread out at all. This is a .44, that was a contact discharge, and you can see it right there. And this is a 12 gauge shotgun. And you can see even with the 12 gauge shotgun, because of the pellets, it does get dispersed a little more, but you still get a pretty perfect circle right here. This right here is a contact discharge on skin. So this is what it looks like if somebody is shot like point blank range, like the barrel of the gun is actually on the skin, and you can see that the skin actually gets bruising in the exact shape of the barrel of the gun. So if it's not a contact discharge, our next things that we're going to take a look at is like what it looks like going away from your target. So if you're anywhere 1.5 feet or less, so 1.5 feet or less away from your target, so that's still pretty close, okay? So 1.5 feet or less, there's like a halo of lead vapors that appears around the hole. So this is about 3 inches. Your gun is 3 inches away from your target. Okay, and then this is a distance of about 1 foot away. And notice, okay, there's some small little spots here of GSR, but it's definitely less prominent the further you get away. 1.5 feet to 2 feet, the presence of scattered specks are kind of there, but it's much harder to see. And make sure you write this down. Any more than 3 feet away from your target, the GSR is not going to be present. You're not going to be able to do a GSR test or see any GSR present. You're too far away, and all those particles just dissipate in the air. And here's a .44 caliber weapon. You can see this is at 3 inches, and then this is a foot. And you can see all along here, here's all your GSR. You see how it's spreading out more the further you get away from your target. Shotguns at close range are a little bit different. Less than a couple inches away from your body, you have an exploded body cavity. Remember we talked about how investigators will know for sure if somebody's been shot with a shotgun just because of the severity of what the body looks like. This is what the GSR or the pellets kind of look like at different distances. So a shotgun at the distance of 1 inch, this is what the GSR pattern would look like. Very rounded, just like the barrel of the gun. At 10 feet, this is not GSR, this is the pellets. Okay, because it's going to be a little different with shotguns because they have pellets instead of bullets. And then this is a distance of 20 feet, but you can see how the pellets kind of spread out a little bit more. So it's easier to kind of get a feel of how far the shooter was with a shotgun just because of the pellets. Whereas your handguns and your rifles, you don't get that opportunity quite as well. So shotguns kind of get a different feel because of the pellets. You can kind of gauge a distance based on how far the pellets have spread out. Okay, so GSR on your shooter. When a weapon is fired, there's always a little bit of what they call kind of back spray. It's where the powder and the primer and stuff are blown back onto the shooter's hand. So we talked about for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So some of that powder goes forward and some of it gets blown backwards. When you're holding a gun, you're usually looking for GSR on the thumb, the outside thumb, and the back hand of the person. Not on the inside where they're holding the gun, but the outside. So your outside of your hand and the outside edge of your thumb is where you would look for GSR, because that's it kind of gets blown back over the gun. And they would test for that. There's like a specific test where they test for the nitrates in the powder. So when you're looking for GSR on the shooter, you're looking on the back side of the hand and the thumb, not on the inside that's actually touching the gun, just because of the way it gets blown back. So there's two tests that they use to determine if GSR is present. So if they think that a shooter was in this area and they want to test the area for GSR, or they think that the shooter was close to a person and they want to test the person, like their t-shirt or something like that, for GSR, there's the grease test. So this is number 1, is your grease test. And then the sodium rhodizonate test is number 2. The grease test is the one I want you guys to be most familiar with. Okay, this is the one that gets used most often. So that's the one I want you guys to be familiar with. And it's basically a color test. It's testing for nitrites, which are found in most gunpowder that's used. And so what they're doing is it's just a color change test. If the nitrites are present, the area that they're testing turns like an orangish yellow color. Okay, or sorry, an orangish red color. Orange-red specks appear if there's GSR, and it'll appear in the pattern that the GSR was left. The second test is a sodium rhodizonate test. It's the same thing. It's testing for lead, okay, which is also used, and it's a red-yellow change if GSR is present. Okay, so the grease test is the one that we're going to focus on mainly, and you would just kind of spray the area, and if there is nitrites in the area from the GSR, it'll turn a orange-red color in the specks, so it'll look something like this. Okay, so the big things to remember from today is how to determine the distance of the shooter from where the shot was. And you use GSR, and the more spread out it is, the further the distance. The more compact the GSR is, the closer the person was. Okay, and then the grease test is the test you use to test if GSR is present, because it's not always visible. So the grease test is what they would use to see if GSR was present on a location that they were looking at.